Good morning, Madam Chairperson.
Good morning.
Committee members.
Thank you for being here.
Thank you. It's been 4 years since I met Greg Pruitt out in front of the Boise Gun Shop here in town, and he was standing out front with his petition. At that time, he only had 3,000 signatures, but obviously this legislation has gained momentum in our state. I began working with Greg those 4 years ago. I'm an attorney in private practice here, and before I became more of a Second Amendment lawyer, I was a prosecutor, and I worked side by side with law enforcement. And I don't want to reiterate all the many things that have been said this morning. I want to focus instead on Greg's focus throughout this process and in supporting permitless carry for several years on the safety of law enforcement, because it has been a concern to the Idaho Second Amendment Alliance. I think it's been a concern to everyone who's been involved with this legislation. One of the things that I wrote down that I wanted to repeat verbatim this morning is a quote from a sheriff in another state, Wyoming, where they passed permitless carry. And the sheriff that I'm going to quote was very opposed to permitless carry initially. However, he changed his mind after the law passed. And what he said is, when the Wyoming legislature passed constitutional carry in 2011, and prior to passing that legislation, I had safety concerns for the officers, and I had public safety concerns. However, my concerns have been allayed over the last few years as we have not experienced increased gun crimes or assaults on deputies. And I also grew up in a household with law enforcement. My dad was a cop for over 30 years. So I've grown up with guns, I've grown up with law enforcement, I've been in law enforcement as a prosecutor. And we are very concerned not only about the safety of law enforcement, but the safety of the public. This bill is not going to be detrimental in either one of those respects. Instead, it actually allows law-abiding citizens to carry, not the criminals. There's no change in the law, and I believe that was already pointed out this morning, that's going to allow criminals or the mentally ill or anyone else who cannot be in possession of a firearm to suddenly be able to do so. I think it is a very rare circumstance, if it would ever happen, where a criminal would actually try to go through a legal process in order to acquire a firearm that they intend to use unlawfully. That's just not the way the world works. Criminals acquire firearms illegally, they possess them illegally, they carry them illegally, and then they use them illegally. And that's not what we're talking about with this legislation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any questions for Ms. Kincaid? See none. Thank you. David Steed, and after David Steed will be Parrish Miller. Welcome to the committee, Mr. Steed.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I'm actually, Senators, thank you for listening for me today. I appreciate that. I'm actually the only firearms instructor who's here today. I have a concern about the bill, with all due respect to you, Mr. McKenzie. No training is going to be required. I invite each and every one of you to come to a firearms class. Sit there and listen to the questions we get. Can I carry in a bar? Can I drink? Can I go down to the bank and carry? These are common questions that are asked that we teach the citizens with an attorney what is right and what is wrong. Whether we go permitless or we don't, where's the education? That's my question. And if this bill goes through, why don't we just stop driver's licenses? Because we know how to drive a car, so why do we need a driver's license? Does that make sense? That's all I have to say.
Thank you. Questions for Mr. Steed? Seeing none. Thank you very much. Thank you. All right, Parrish Miller, and after Parrish will be Marquart. Welcome.
Thank you, Senator. My name is Parrish Miller. I'm here representing myself primarily today. I'm a gun owner, have been for many years. I have concealed carry permits from 4 different states in order to have greater reciprocity. I've gone through professional training. I go to the range regularly just to keep myself sharp. I'm certainly not opposed to training. It is important, and I know this issue has been raised before, but it is important to understand it does not require any firearms training to carry in Idaho. It doesn't even require firearms training to get a permit to carry in Idaho if you're getting a standard permit. Many Idahoans carry without any professional training. That's not necessarily something I would recommend, but it's just simply something that's true. A lot of the complaints about this bill really seem to be pointed more at the current law than the changes being proposed here today. We've heard about suicide. I'm not aware of any cases where somebody concealed carries a weapon to some other location in a city and commits suicide. Those generally occur in homes. People who are allowed to possess handguns in their home, that's not changing under this law. I'm not trying to minimize any of these important issues, but they simply aren't relevant to the issue we're discussing here today. The police chiefs of the urban areas here of Garden City, Meridian, and Boise, they've raised concerns. And I think it's important to understand what they're talking about. There was a quote, and I believe this was actually from a police chief up in Coeur d'Alene, that he was concerned that he would not be able to stop someone and ask to see their permit simply because they were carrying a firearm, because he observed, he said, a bulge that looked like a firearm. Well, that's actually a very questionable practice anyway under Ohio v. Terry with the Supreme Court. There has to be reasonable suspicion of a crime being committed. There was another Supreme Court decision where it was determined that police officers could not stop a driver merely to inquire if they had a license to operate a motor vehicle. Police should not be engaging in the common practice of stopping people simply to inquire whether their carrying of a firearm is legal or not. So if that's something they're doing, perhaps this law is even more necessary than we realized in order to nudge them in the correct direction of not doing that. There has to be a reasonable suspicion. Finally, this bill isn't perfect. I'm reluctant to support the residency requirement. I think that will be confusing to some people. To the snowbirder who lives half the year in Arizona where they have permitless carry and half the year in Idaho, are they going to know whether they qualify as a resident? There's different residency requirements for voting, for taxation, for in-student tuition. This is an area that could confuse citizens. It's an area, quite frankly, that could confuse law enforcement. Is it based on where you have a driver's license? Is it based on where your vehicle is registered? What if those two things are opposite? Do you qualify as a resident? I think some clarification may be in order, but for what we have now, I think this is a good bill, and I would encourage you to support it. I'd happily stand for any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Miller. Any questions for Mr. Miller? Seeing none, thank you for being here. Kay, is it Mascot? I can't read the writing. C-A-Y. Okay. All right. William Bones? Oh, wait a minute. Sorry.
I put down no for testifying, but I thought I did anyway.
Well,
But
you might
since-
have.
Okay.
Yes, you did.
Yes, I did. All right, well, since I'm here,
We'll give you a minute.
I'm Kay Marquart from Boise, Idaho, and I wasn't prepared to testify, and I did put down no, but since I was called, I'm going to testify. It'll be very brief. This is from yesterday. Yesterday's paper, 81% of Idahoans think that things should be the way they've been for almost 100 years. I oppose this bill, and I would really, really appreciate it if the people in the legislature would listen to the voters. Be something new for a change. Thank you.
Oh, ma'am, we do listen. We do listen. All right, we have, these folks have signed up as pro, but do not wish to testify. Mark McCoy, Taylor Story, and Dan Willard, and they don't wish to testify. The next one to testify is Jason, is it Mackerel? McCrill? Sorry. Thank you for being here today, sir.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me. Madam Chairperson, members of the committee, thank you. My name is Jason McCrill. I'm a fourth-generation Idahoan, and I grew up in a gun-owning family. I have no criminal record. I'm a former federal law enforcement officer in the Coast Guard, and I am here to speak in support of Senate Bill 1389. The reason that we have a right to keep and bear arms in the first place, the right guaranteed to us, enumerated to us in the U.S. Constitution and the Idaho Constitution. The reason that right is so important, that it needs specifically be enumerated, is the Founding Fathers knew that an armed society is a free society, as evidenced by our victory in the Revolutionary War. We achieved our freedom with the use of arms and have maintained that freedom and have never been invaded, because other nations are well aware that there's a rifle behind every blade of grass. We cannot protect our nation if we cannot protect ourselves as individuals, and that logic stems from what I learned in the Coast Guard. You have to be able to have your boat and your team in order to go out and rescue other people. Otherwise, you're useless. Some argue that citizens need not be armed because we have the world's greatest military, but history and human nature have proven that governments who disarm their citizens victimize their citizens. Those governments either oppress the citizenry themselves, or they leave the otherwise incapable of protecting themselves and others from criminals who will arm themselves and victimize those whom they know are incapable of fighting them off. Criminals and bullies target the weak because they believe they can get away with it. They avoid those who they know are stronger and therefore unable to prevent them from carrying out their evil acts. The right to keep and bear arms is the only equalizer available to many would-be victims. In Idaho, open carry is legal. You don't need a permit for it. You don't need training for it. But it's not realistic to expect that law-abiding armed citizens will open carry whenever they want to carry, because we don't want to be the perceived cause of controversy and confrontation with those who are opposed to our ideal. We who are law-abiding citizens can carry concealed outside city limits to protect ourselves and others. That protection must be extended to city limits. First, it's not realistic to expect a law-abiding citizen driving through the state to, one, know where the city limits are, and two, even if they did know where the city limits are, to expose and then stow their firearms as they travel through the state. The current state of the law exposes well-intentioned law-abiding Idahoans to becoming hapless criminals. And as I received in an email from Senator McKenzie, thank you for that was an oversight last year. Senate Bill 1389 will take care of that oversight. It'll fix that problem. More importantly, mass shootings and most violent crime occur in cities because that's where the majority of the targets are. That said, like my friend Greg Pruitt, I'm carrying concealed today with a permit. And like Greg said, I'm well aware of the potential results of my choice to carry. So I train often, because if the time ever comes that I do need to use my firearm to defend myself or to defend someone else, I need to be sure that I react appropriately. The most important point I would like to make is that those of us who do carry legally because we respect the laws and we respect life. We are well aware that there are those who would prefer we do not carry. We choose to carry not just to protect ourselves, but to protect those who oppose us. We do not distinguish between them and us. We are equal opportunity protectors, and we should not be required to obtain a permit to fulfill that role that was anticipated by our Founding Fathers and guaranteed to us by the most powerful governmental document in existence. Thank you. I'll happily stand for any questions.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions? Seeing none, thank you for being here
You're welcome.
today.
Thank you.
Thank you. Chief Bones?